There's a pain that has no name, an empty feeling that's been with you since you can remember existing. It's not exactly sadness. It's not depression. It's something far more profound. Like there's a hole in the center of your chest. A void that no achievement, no relationship, no amount of success can ever fill. You might have a brilliant career, a loving family, great friends, everything that's supposed to bring you happiness, and yet, when you're alone at night, that emptiness surfaces, silent, persistent, unexplainable. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, and what he discovered about the origin of this emptiness will completely change how you understand your own story. Most people who experience this chronic emptiness do the same thing. They try to fill it with work, with relationships, with achievements, with the approval of others, with shopping, with food, with anything that offers temporary relief from that feeling of incompleteness. But nothing works for long, because the problem isn't what's missing now. The problem is what was missing back then, before you even had the words to express what you felt. Jung called this a failure in primary mirroring. And this failure happens in the earliest years of life, often so subtly that the child doesn't even realize something is wrong. Imagine a young woman named Ashley. Today, she's 37 years old. She's a lawyer at a prestigious law firm. She earns a good salary. She's respected by her colleagues. She has a nice apartment, a new car, everything her parents always wanted her to achieve. But Ashley carries a secret that no one knows. At night, when she gets home and closes the door, she feels such an enormous void that sometimes she has to sit on the bathroom floor and take deep breaths, just to keep from panicking. She doesn't know where this feeling comes from. It's always been there, like a shadow, like something that's part of her, but that she's never been able to name. Ashley's parents weren't bad people. On the contrary, they were considered picture-perfect parents. Her father was a doctor. Her mother was a university professor, both intelligent, successful, respected in the community. They never hit Ashley. They never yelled. They never did anything that could be classified as obvious abuse. And that's exactly why Ashley has spent her whole life confused. Because if her parents were so good, why does she feel so empty inside? Jung would have the answer. The problem wasn't what Ashley's parents did, it was what they didn't do. It was what they failed to offer, not out of malice, but because they themselves had never received it. When Ashley was a baby, she did what all babies do. She looked to her mother, seeking recognition, seeking that gaze that says, "You exist, and I see you. You are important. You are real." But Ashley's mother, although physically present, was emotionally absent. She was preoccupied with her career, with the expectations of her own mother, with proving that she was good enough for the world. And when she looked at Ashley, she didn't see Ashley. She saw a reflection of herself. She saw an extension of her own dreams and frustrations. This is what Jung called narcissistic mirroring. Instead of reflecting the child back to herself, the narcissistic parent reflects their own needs projected onto the child. The child isn't seen for who she is. She's seen for what the parent needs her to be. And this creates a structural emptiness in the psyche, because the child never receives the most basic confirmation of all, the confirmation that she exists as a separate and valid being. Hold on, because what comes next is going to make you rethink your entire childhood. Healthy emotional mirroring works like this. The child expresses an emotion, anger, sadness, a fear, joy, and the parent reflects that emotion back in a regulated way. If the child is sad, the mother says, "I see that you're sad, and it's okay to feel that way." If the child is angry, father says, "I understand that you're angry, and we'll deal with it together." This seemingly simple process is what builds the child's self. It's what teaches the child that her emotions are real, valid, and manageable. It's what creates the internal structure that allows a person to feel complete. But when parents are narcissistic, even subtly, This mirroring doesn't happen. Instead of reflecting the child's emotion, the parents reflect their own emotion. If the child is sad, the narcissistic mother might say, "You're making me sad with that behavior." If the child is angry, the narcissistic father might say, "You're making me look like a bad parent." The child's emotion isn't validated. It's hijacked. It's used as fuel for the parent's emotional needs. Over time, the child learns a devastating lesson. My emotions don't matter. My internal experience isn't real. What matters is what my parents feel. What matters is how I make my parents feel. And so begins the construction of what Jung called the false self. A mask, a persona. A version of oneself created exclusively to meet the needs of the parents and ensure emotional survival. Ashley did exactly that. From a very young age, she learned to be the perfect daughter, to not cause trouble, to not have needs that bothered anyone, to be studious, well-behaved, quiet, to never express anger or sadness in a way that could disturb the family harmony. And she was rewarded for it. She was praised. She was called mature for her age. She was held up as an example to other children. But no one realized the price she was paying. Every time Ashley suppressed an emotion to please her parents, a part of her true self died a little. Every time she pretended to be okay when she wasn't, the emptiness grew. Because she wasn't being herself, she was being what her parents needed her to be. And that difference, although invisible, is the difference between feeling alive and feeling empty. Remember this about the false self, because it will make a lot of sense when I talk about adult relationships. When a child grows up without being truly seen, she develops what we can call recognition hunger, a deep, and often unconscious, need to finally be seen for who she really is. And this hunger manifests in curious ways in adulthood. Ashley, for example, developed a pattern in relationships. She always fell for emotionally unavailable people. Men who were charming at first, but who could never really connect with her, who kept her at a distance, who made her feel exactly as she felt in childhood, present but invisible, close but unseen. Why does this happen? Jung explained it with the concept of repetition compulsion. The unconscious seeks to repeat unresolved situations from childhood in the hope of finally resolving them. There's a pain, a haunting emptiness. That's been with you for as long as you can remember. It's not quite sadness and not quite depression. It's something deeper, like a void at the very core of your being. A void that no achievement, no relationship, no success can ever truly fill. You might have a stellar career, a loving family, a fantastic group of friends, all the things that are supposed to bring happiness. And yet, when you're alone at night, that emptiness creeps in, silent, persistent, unexplainable. This feeling. Carl Jung dedicated decades to understanding it, and his discoveries about the origin of this emptiness will completely reshape how you understand your own story. Ashley didn't choose unavailable men by chance. She chose them because they replicated the emotional dynamic of her parents, and on some unconscious level, she hoped that this time would be different, that this time she would finally be seen, that this time she would finally fill the void. But it never worked. Because you can't solve a childhood wound through adult relationships. You can't ask a partner to give you the primary mirroring that. Your parents didn't provide. It's not fair to the partner, and it doesn't work because the wound is from a time when you were still forming as a person. What was missing back then can't be given now in the same way. This doesn't mean you're condemned to feel empty forever, but it does mean that the path to healing leads through a different place. At 30, Ashley started therapy, not because she knew what was wrong, but because the panic attacks were becoming unbearable. Her therapist used a Jungian approach, and in the first few sessions, something started to shift. For the first time in her life, Ashley had the experience of being heard without judgment, of expressing emotions without them being hijacked by someone else, of saying, "I feel empty," and hearing back, "Tell me more about this emptiness," instead of "You shouldn't feel that way." This seemingly simple process is what Jung called re-parenting. It's the experience of receiving, in a safe therapeutic environment, the emotional mirroring that should have been received in childhood. It's not the same thing. It can't be. But it's enough to start building what wasn't built, to begin developing a true self that can coexist with the false self and that was created to survive. Hold on, because now comes the most important part of everything I've said so far. Jung warned about a risk that few therapists even mention, the risk of simply blaming your parents and stopping there. Yes, Ashley's parents failed her. Yes, they didn't offer the emotional mirroring she needed, but they were also children once. They also had parents who didn't see them. They also carried voids that they never managed to name. Parental narcissism isn't a choice. It's a wound, transmitted from generation to generation. Parents who can't see their children usually weren't seen by their own parents, and so the cycle continues until someone has the courage to look at their own pain instead of projecting it onto their children. Ashley began to realize this when she learned more about her mother's story. She discovered that her maternal grandmother was an extremely critical woman who never praised, who never showed affection. She discovered that her mother grew up feeling invisible, exactly like Ashley felt. Her mother couldn't give Ashley what she herself had never received. It wasn't malice, it was inability. It was a wound, passing on to the next generation. This understanding doesn't erase Ashley's pain. It doesn't justify what happened, but it changes how she relates to that pain. Instead of wasting energy hating her parents, she can use that energy to break the cycle, to become the person who finally stops the generational transmission of emptiness. But wait, because there's a part of this story I haven't told yet, and it might be the most important part. Ashley's father. Throughout her childhood, her father was a distant figure, physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. He worked a lot. He came home late, on weekends. He was in his office, or watching television in silence. Ashley remembers trying to get closer to him when she was little, showing him drawings she had made at school, telling him stories about her day, but the answers were always monosyllabic. "That's nice. Very good. There was no open rejection. There was no criticism. There was something worse. There was indifference. And the indifference of a father does something very specific to a child's psyche. It teaches them that they aren't interesting enough to deserve attention, that their existence isn't important enough to justify the effort of connection. Jung wrote extensively about the paternal complex. When the father is emotionally absent, the child develops a wound related to authority, to external validation, and to their own worth in the world. Girls with absent fathers tend to grow up seeking male approval compulsively. Boys with absent fathers tend to grow up without knowing how to relate to themselves or to other men. Ashley did this without realizing it. In work meetings, she always sought the approval of the older men, the bosses, the male authority figures. Each compliment from them was like a drug, and each criticism was devastating. Because in her unconscious, each older man was a new chance to finally be seen by her father, to finally receive that validation that never came. This is the power of what Jung called projection. We project parental figures onto people we meet in adulthood, and we get stuck in relationships that repeat the dynamics of childhood until we become aware of what we're doing, until we stop seeking in others what our parents couldn't give us. There's something I need to explain before I continue, and it's about the family shadow. Jung believed that every family has a collective shadow. These are the denied, repressed, hidden aspects that no one wants to acknowledge. In narcissistic families, this shadow is especially dense because the appearance of perfection is maintained at all costs, and everything that threatens this appearance and is pushed under the rug. In Ashley's family, the shadow was emotional fragility. No one could show weakness. No one could admit they were suffering. The father never cried. The mother never asked for help. And Ashley learned that being strong meant never showing vulnerability, that asking for support was a sign of failure, that her own emotional needs were a burden to others. This family shadow molded Ashley's entire adult life. She couldn't ask for help even when she desperately needed it. She couldn't admit when she was suffering. She maintained the mask of a strong, independent person, even when she was crumbling inside. And the emptiness grew. Because the more she denied her own needs, the more disconnected from herself she became. That's how the shadow works. The more you deny something, the more power it has over you. The more you hide a part of yourself, the more that part controls your life, behind the scenes. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Ashley thought that her fate was to feel empty forever, that this was simply who she was, an incomplete person, a person who would never be truly happy. But it wasn't fate, it was the shadow operating, and these were unconscious patterns that Ashley had absorbed in childhood, and they kept repeating, because she had never questioned them. And this brings me to Carl Jung's most important concept for anyone experiencing this emptiness. The concept of individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you really are, of integrating all parts of yourself, of stopping living through the false self and starting to live through the true self. It's a long process, difficult and often painful, but it's the only real path to filling that void, because the emptiness isn't there because something is missing from the outside. The emptiness exists because parts of you have been denied, repressed, hidden, parts that your picture-perfect parents couldn't accept, parts that you learn to reject in yourself. When you start to integrate these parts, when you start to accept everything that you are, the emptiness begins to diminish. It's not magic, it's not instantaneous, and it's a work of years, but it is possible. Pay attention to what I'm about to say now, because this could change how you see yourself. That void you feel, it's not a defect, it's a message. It's the part of you that was silenced in childhood, screaming to be heard. It's the true self that was hidden, begging to finally exist. Carl Jung used to say that symptoms are the psyche's way of communicating to us, that something needs attention. The emptiness is a symptom, and the message behind it is clear. You need to come home, not to your parents' house, to the home of yourself. Ashley started to understand this after 2 years of therapy. The emptiness didn't disappear completely. Maybe it never will entirely. But it changed in quality. It stopped being a terrifying hole and became a space to be filled, an invitation to self-discovery, a reminder that there were still parts of her waiting to be known. She started doing things she had never allowed herself to do before, things that her parents would have considered a waste of time or frivolous. She started painting, not to be an artist, just because she enjoyed it. She started dancing alone in her apartment. She started saying no to commitments she didn't want. She started crying when she was sad, instead of swallowing the tears. Each of these small actions was an act of integration. It was the true self being allowed to exist for the first time. Jung called this giving voice to the shadow. Because the shadow isn't just the bad parts we hide. The shadow also contains all the good parts that were repressed, the creativity that her parents didn't value, the sensitivity that was seen as weakness, the spontaneous joy. That was silenced to maintain order. When you integrate the shadow, you're not just dealing with the negative, you're rescuing treasures that were buried. Ashley discovered she loved gardening, something she had never experienced, because her parents considered manual labor inferior. She discovered that she had a sense of humor, something that had been suffocated by years of forced seriousness. She discovered that she was capable of deep connection when she stopped seeking approval and simply allowed herself to be vulnerable. The emptiness still appears sometimes, especially in moments of transition or stress. But now Ashley knows what to do with it. Instead of trying to fill it with external things, she sits with it, asks what it's trying to tell her, uses it as a guide to identify which part of herself needs attention. That's individuation in practice. It's not about becoming a perfect person. It's about becoming a whole person, a person who knows all their parts, who accepts the light and the shadow, who no longer needs external validation because they've learned to validate themselves internally. Now I need to talk about something that few channels have the courage to address, and that's anger, for a long time. Ashley didn't feel anger toward her parents. She only felt emptiness and sadness. But as therapy progressed, something started to emerge. A deep anger that had been repressed for decades. Anger for not having been seen. Anger for having to perform her whole life. Anger for carrying a burden that should never have been hers. Many people run away from this anger. They think feeling angry at their parents is wrong, that they should forgive immediately and move on. But Carl Jung warned about the dangers of premature forgiveness. You can't genuinely forgive something that you've never acknowledged. You can't process a pain that you've never allowed yourself to feel. Forgiveness that comes before anger isn't forgiveness. It's repression in disguise. Ashley needed to go through the anger. She needed to feel the injustice of what she had experienced. She needed to recognize that she had every right to be angry, not to get stuck in that anger forever, but to go through it and reach the other side. And the other side isn't hate, it's understanding. It's seeing her parents as flawed people who did what they could with the tools they had. It's recognizing that they, too, were wounded children who never healed their own wounds. It's understanding the generational cycle, not to excuse it, but to break it. Ashley today has a different relationship with her parents. It's not a perfect relationship. It probably never will be. But it's an honest relationship. She stopped waiting for them to change. She stopped waiting for them to finally see her. She accepted that they do the best they can, even if that best isn't enough. And she decided that the validation she needs is going to come from herself. That's emotional maturity. It's not resignation. It's liberation. It's stopping spending energy trying to change people who don't want to or can't change, and redirecting that energy to build the life you want to have. You've just discovered the true origin of the emptiness you carry. The failure in primary mirroring that shaped your entire psychic structure. The mechanisms that your parents used, often without realizing it, that made you build a false self and lose connection with who you really were. This information isn't easy to hear, but it's liberating, because when you understand the origin of the wound, you can finally start to heal it. I make these videos because I believe this information needs to reach more people, because so many people spend their whole lives feeling empty, without knowing why. If this video has helped you in any way, you can support this work by clicking on the Super Thanks button below. It's not just financial support. It's you saying that this truth about narcissistic families needs to continue to be shared. And it's you being part of a community that's breaking generational cycles of pain. Now, let's talk about the signs that healing is happening, because it's important to know how to recognize progress, even when it seems slow. The first sign is the ability to be alone without despair. See, people with deep emptiness are often afraid of solitude, because when they're alone, the emptiness becomes unbearable. But as healing advances, solitude transforms into peaceful alone time, into a space of meeting yourself. Instead of a frightening empty space, Ashley realized this when she spent an entire weekend alone and felt no panic. She felt peace. For the first time in her life, her own company was enough. She didn't need external distractions to feel alive. Life was within her. The second sign is the decreased need for external approval. You stop wondering what others will think before making decisions. You stop molding your behavior to please. You stop feeling devastated by criticism or indifferent to praise. Because the validation that matters now comes from within. Ashley noticed this when she received criticism at work, and instead of panicking, she could objectively evaluate the criticism. Part of it was valid, and she could improve. Part was the projection of someone else, and had nothing to do with her. This capacity for discernment only exists when you have a solid foundation of self-worth. The third sign is the ability to feel emotions without being dominated by them. You can be sad without sinking into depression. You can be angry without exploding. You can be afraid without freezing. Emotions become useful information rather than threats to survival. This happens because you've developed what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to observe your own emotions from a higher perspective, to be in the middle of the emotional storm, and still know that you are not the storm. The fourth sign is the change in relationships. You stop attracting emotionally unavailable people. You stop repeating the patterns of childhood. You start relating to people who really see you, and you can receive the love they offer, instead of distrusting or sabotaging it. Ashley is in a relationship now. It's not perfect. No relationship is, but it's real. She chose someone who sees her, who listens to her, who accepts her whole, including the parts she's still learning to integrate. And for the first time, she's not trying to be who the other person wants. She's simply being who she is. The fifth sign, and perhaps the most important, is peace with your parents. Not necessarily reconciliation, not necessarily forgiveness in the traditional sense, but peace, the ability to think of them without being flooded with anger or pain, the acceptance that they are who they are, the release of the hope that one day they will be different. This peace doesn't mean that what they did was right. It means you've stopped letting the past control your present, that the story of your childhood has become just that, a story, not a life sentence. Carl Jung said that we are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become, despite what happened to us. Your parents may have planted the emptiness in you, but you are not obligated to cultivate it forever. The journey of individuation is long, I won't lie. It takes years, maybe a lifetime, but every step matters. Every moment of self-awareness, every time you choose to see yourself instead of running away from yourself, every time you allow an emotion instead of repressing it, every time you act from the true self instead of the false self, the emptiness diminishes, not all at once, little by little, like a wound that slowly heals. There will be relapses. There will be days when the emptiness seems as big as before. But if you continue on the path, you'll realize that those days become rarer, and that the solid foundation you're building within yourself becomes increasingly stable. Today, Ashley looks back and barely recognizes who she was. That woman who sat on the bathroom floor in panic seems like someone else. Not because the emptiness magically disappeared, but because she learned to live with it, to transform it, to use that empty space to plant seeds of self-knowledge. If you've made it this far in this video, something resonated with you. Maybe you recognized yourself in Ashley. Maybe you understood for the first time why you carry this emptiness. Maybe you're starting to see your childhood with different eyes. That's already the beginning of healing. Awareness, recognition, the courage to look at the truth instead of running away from it. I want to hear from you. What was the phrase your parents repeated the most that you only now realize hurt you? Tell me in the comments. Not to expose your parents, but to validate your own experience, to know that you are not alone, to be part of a community of people who are choosing to break the cycle, because when you name the wound, it loses power over you. And when you share, you help others name theirs. The emptiness you feel can be the door to the greatest transformation of your life. It's not a curse, it's a calling to finally know yourself, to finally see yourself, to finally become who you always were, beneath all the masks. Carl Jung spent his life studying this process. And his conclusion is simple but profound. The most important task of human life is to give birth to yourself, to become who you really are. That's not selfishness. It's the greatest contribution you can give to the world, because a whole person illuminates everyone around them. You don't have to continue being empty. The wound of childhood doesn't have to define your adult life. The parents who couldn't see you don't determine your worth. You can see yourself. You can validate yourself. You can become whole. And it starts now, with the awareness you just acquired, with the decision to stop running away from the emptiness and start listening to it, with the courage to embark on the journey of individuation. I'll be here, sharing more truths about the human psyche, more insights from Carl Jung, more tools for healing. If this video helped you, subscribe and activate the bell. And remember, the emptiness is not your enemy, it's a messenger, and it's time to listen to the message.